How are you, Jeremy?
I'm good, Rich. Thanks for having me. I'm now envisioning a social media coordinator showing Art Rooney II, AB in a 49ers uniform, and explaining that dynamic.
Right.
It has me laughing.
You know what I mean? So Jeremy Fowler confirms Art Rooney does not have Instagram on his phone. Okay, that's the confirmed. Let's put it on the Rich Eisen Show bottom line right there. So how messy is this situation? Can it at all, even with this Instagram craziness aside for today, be put back into a black and gold box and run back next year?
Yeah, I do see a small chance of that, Rich, because Art Rooney has left the door open a few times publicly in his recent interviews that a conversation could go a long way. You know, I think it's even some of the players that I've spoken to that think it's probably over. They say if Brown comes in and shows some contrition for what happened in Week 17, that can go a long way. And, asking around at the Pro Bowl where I talked to several Steelers players, they all came out full frontal in support of Brown. And from what I've gathered, a lot of the team leaders have been in contact about this whole scenario, and they basically decided they're all going to support him. They're prepared for what happens either way, and they want a more orderly locker room in 2019. But, it's a tough dynamic because he's very well liked despite his issues. They love the way that he works. And, of course, he produces, but they really like the guy and hanging out with Brown and him as a piece of the locker room. He's just unreliable in a lot of spots.
Well, I mean, in a lot of spots. I mean, when the season's on the line, week 17, Jeremy. So what did happen week 17, best you can piece together?
Well, so from what I was told, Brown actually was in the building on Saturday at some point, but he was not there for the work session. So, the walk through all that, he was not a part of that. He did disappear for most of that. And so from everything that I've gathered, he felt underappreciated. There was a flare-up midweek. I don't think it was as demonstrative as it was made out to be. After several players that I've spoken to who witnessed the thing, and Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown did speak afterward from what I've gathered. But there are a lot of theories out there, but I still think the prevailing theme is it's a combination of underappreciation, feeling maybe like a scapegoat. I know he wasn't happy with maybe some of the criticisms from Roethlisberger earlier or after Week 12 in the Denver game about route running, things like that. The emergence of Juju Smith-Schuster. He likes Juju. I know they're friends, but him winning the team MVP, a lot of players I've spoken to feel that they can't say for sure, but they do feel like that's a major factor here, the emergence of Juju and that team MVP that he won.
And also, you were in your piece intimate strongly, I might add, that Brown's absence in Week 17 was self-imposed, all to point out how integral he is to Juju Smith-Schuster's success, that he draws double teams that allows Juju Smith-Schuster to have the season that he had, and he was going to show everybody that without him the offense would struggle in that regard, and sure enough it did, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, I did speak to a team source that believes that to be the case, but the problem was Brown wasn't really talking to many people that week, so a lot of people are left to theorize on this situation. But, they knew the dynamic and what was happening with the offense and Brown's place in it, and that was certainly a factor.
Well, there's also in this piece, too, Jeremy Fowler from ESPN, that I want to point out here. One current Steeler that you wrote, an unnamed current Steeler. I don't like seeing AB blamed for all this. To me, he's not the problem. And then the next paragraph is the problem, according to the player, is that the Steelers' locker room issues play out too publicly. That's number 7, Jeremy. I mean, let's not kid each other here. And so how many factions are there in this locker room right now?
Well, I've been in this locker room for about 4 years now, covering the team, and it's really a normal locker room for the most part, where guys just come to work. But you have a few players that create a lot of the headlines, and so it can become an issue that way. And that player I spoke to, he was a staunch defender of Brown, as are many players, and that's sort of the layer to this discussion that makes it difficult, because on the surface, Brown has stepped over the line, and they all know that. But it was really just an accumulation of minor issues over the years, whether you're late to a meeting or You might get a perk or star treatment that they don't get, but they all saw it as, for the most part, minor stuff because he worked so hard when he was on the field and on his own training, and then he produced on Sundays like that. That to them was the equalizer. That's why they don't feel like he's the problem, because he's got a relationship with everybody in the locker room, and he is very well liked. And so you have, from what one player called a love-hate relationship with Brown and Roethlisberger. I think it's been mostly love, but what we've seen the last 2 years, and it has played out publicly, that there have been some issues, and so that is a dynamic that's hard to ignore. But even it's not like Roethlisberger is demonstrative in the facility, and it's not like he's missing meetings here. That's been the issue with Brown lately. He's just not showing up, and so it is hard to blame anybody else in that regard.
So how can teammates say, yeah, we're cool with AB if he doesn't show up at the most important time, Jeremy? And that has been confirmed. Like he did not show up at the most important time. I mean, and I've been around him. He's infectious, and I understand he's dynamite, which also makes it confusing as to why he feels unloved when he's absurdly well paid. And folks like me and you and everybody else in our business, when we talk about who's the best receiver in the game, he is literally the first, if not second, words out of somebody's mouth. So how does this all work? I mean, how does it get fixed?
Right. Well, that's where you need some of the key locker room guys, the leaders, the veterans, to probably come together and just to say that this is something they can't take anymore. They might need to take that to Tomlin or figure something out. But you're right. It's a weird dynamic because, on one side they respect him, but the patience is starting to grow thin. I think they're supporting him because on some levels they have to, because he could very well be back here, whether they can't work out a trade or he has a good conversation with ownership or Mike Tomlin, they work something out. And so, they certainly want to be able to work with him, but you can sense the growing frustration, there's no doubt. And a lot of the old players or guys that maybe played with Brown earlier in their career and are now done and aren't on the team, they think that there is maybe a problem where, hey, the old locker room wouldn't have tolerated this. We had all those defensive leaders, Troy Polamalu comes to mind, Joey Porter once upon a time, but those kind of figureheads where, grievances were aired internally and you tried to work it all out. And so, they point out that maybe this locker room doesn't have that. I think this locker room would disagree, and this is probably a chance for them to do something about it. But they have, in a lot of cases, made apologies for Brown as well.
Yeah, I know. Ryan Clark, your colleague at ESPN, leaps to mind on that group as well. We had Emmanuel Sanders on NFL Game Day Morning where he thought that Brown's behavior in Week 17 was untenable, but he also said that if Ben Roethlisberger spoke about him on a radio show in a passive-aggressive way like he did about Brown and others, that he would have a problem with him and would go up to him in the locker room and say that. So it's all in. I mean, it's just everybody's owning a little bit of piece of this. So when it all comes down to it, does Antonio Brown have a spot on this roster Week 1, 2019 season? Is he playing for the Steelers, Jeremy?
I'm going to say no right now because, asking around the league, talking to some folks, execs, general manager types, they seem to think he's going to have a small market but a strong market, and that some team that needs to get over the top, one piece away, that they'll offer a first-round pick at some point. That'd probably be enough to do it. But, the Steelers have to navigate that. It's going to be about draft capital if they can't get what they need. But, I talked to Senator Marquise Pouncey this week. He said, look, a phone call can go a long way. Tomlin knows Brown really well. They've been together for a long time. He understands how far Brown has come in his life and, really rough teenage years and bouncing around different schools. And so they have connected on a human level before. If they can reconnect like that and figure something out, I don't think it's beyond repair, but it's getting close.
I'm going to keep going with this with you, Jeremy, in our few minutes left, Jeremy Fowler. Does Mike Tomlin have a contract extension on the table Week 1 of the 2019 season?
With an organization that's built on stability, I would say so. Now, I just don't think they would let it twist in the wind, especially when they did win 9 games. It was, I guess, if you're here locally, they would say it's a complete disaster of a season. And considering the talent that they have, it probably is on some levels. But, your kicker flails out. Le'Veon Bell, top 15 player, gone. Ryan Shazier, probably top 25 player. He's gone. Antonio Brown was gone for a week. There are a lot of moving parts. I wonder if the roster was maybe not as talented as led to believe top to bottom, even though they have some obvious strengths. And so, I think they still respect the job that he did. But there are some. I mean, the defense needs more of an identity. Can't finish games. That's a major issue. So if that doesn't clean up next year, then it's a different conversation. But I do think every 2 years, typically in the summer, every other summer, they re-up his contract.
Yep.
Based on precedent and, the stability that Tomlin brings, I think that will get done. But there's a lot to shake out still.
And then week 1, where is Le'Veon Bell, do you think?
Ooh, if they try to transition tag him, it's going to be a big grievance to the NFLPA. You're going to have all these issues. Bell could threaten to sit out again. They could try to do that, try to somehow facilitate a trade, but it just seems so complicated. So I still think the cleanest path for them, let him go to free agency, get your comp pick, third-round pick, or whatever it's going to be. And I'm going to say the Jets. A lot of people say the Colts. From what I've gathered, I do not think the Colts will get Le'Veon Bell. I think it's just going to be a team with a ton of money that needs a playmaker. So I could see Bucks, I could see Jets. Those are two that come to mind.
Last one for you. Week 1 of the 2019 season. Does Ben Roethlisberger have a local radio show that's up on the air?
Week 1, you're saying?
Will he have a radio show, or will the Steelers say that's over and whatever you're making off of it or getting for your charity from it, we will cut you a check? Will they do that?
Oh, man. I doubt it. I mean, just because the precedent of quarterbacks around the league having it, if they did that, then that would create a whole nother power struggle. That
they could come up with it. No, Jeremy, they could come up with however you want to call it, that he's spending time with his family. He's just going to tap out. He's focusing more on football. There's so many ways to handle it. But there's no question, and obviously the microphones will be put in front of him on Wednesdays, just as it is all the time. But there's no reason why there should be some sort of 20-minute forum in which something always gathers a more bizarre news cycle or more steam because of what he's saying in these media sessions.
Well, and Tom was dealt with this too, even like years ago. I remember there was a quote out there saying, "I'm not going to sit up here every week and address what Ben says on his radio show." I just don't see the Steelers checking him on that. I think they see that as, even though it could be a distraction, they see that as not focused on winning. I really think Tomlin doesn't worry a lot about that stuff. I really don't.
Jeremy,
he can say it,
yeah.
But I don't think they're going to do anything about it.
All right. Jeremy, thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Rich. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks again for the piece and for the phone call. It's probably over how it's gone wrong with Antonio Brown and the Steelers, and then there's so many other nuggets in here.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.